Of all the games I played last year, none have stuck in my mind as much as Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown. For fans, it was a return to form after several years of the series wandering in the wilderness, and for non-fans, it was a game that was exciting, captivating, and memorable. A stunning experience that somehow managed to make dogfighting exciting again. To describe Ace Combat 7 like this would most certainly be accurate, but it would also be doing a disservice in describing what makes this game linger on in people's minds, to the point that a brief reference in Formula 1 memes brings nothing but joy. You could call it fast, frantic, and chaotic, but those words don't really show the gravity of what Ace Combat 7 succeeds in, because there are so many other games out there with those same three qualities that's become lost like tears in the rain. I'm probably going to get mocked for this, but the hill I'm willing to die on, and one I'm going to outline in the next several minutes, is that Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown is elegant. I want to preface this by saying that I haven't played a single Ace Combat game before 7, minus a brief PlayStation 1 demo that consisted of destroying airborne and ground-based units without reason or context. I have seen Ace Combat games on the shelves at my local video game store throughout the years, but outside of Secret Weapons over Normandy, combat flight games never really interested me unless it was attached to some property. I've flown and fought in the Battlefield games and the Star Wars Battlefront series, and I'd be lying if I didn't mention Elite Dangerous and the Halo series, but they were accessory mechanics to accompany what made their core gameplay interesting. I'm saying this because there are going to be things I might say that long-time Ace Combat fans may roll their eyes at, or dismiss it as obvious praise or criticism because it is part of the franchise's charm. Of course the controls are tight and intuitive, of course the soundtrack triggers feelings of anticipation and excitement, of course the Belkins are big on conspiracies. That being said, the viewpoint of a non-fan, I feel, can be insightful into understanding why this game felt like a shock to the system. I didn't see any form of advertisement in either print, digital, or video prior to release, and my first exposure was through a review by SkillUp and a let's play from Jesse Cox. At around the third or fourth mission, while watching the latter, I decided to buy it and play through it myself, hoping to have an enjoyable and action-filled experience. And while I did get that in droves, by the time the final credits rolled, I began to ask myself a question that seemed obvious on the surface. Why? Why was this game great from start to finish? Ace Combat 7 has 20 missions, and each one has your main objective being to destroy enemies either on the ground or in the air, or defending a target while you do those same things. With the infinite space of the sky, level design conventions are thrown out of the window, which is difficult for someone like me whose understanding of such comes from decades of playing games that aren't combat flight games at its core. Outside of weather effects such as sandstorms and thunder, there's little that can be done on the design front. There are different terrains that are unique from mission to mission, but when you're in the sky above, this becomes less level design and more environmental design. Most of the time. And yet, these missions are just as exciting, eventful, and memorable as the last, and I didn't really understand why. The only thing I could conjure up to describe Ace Combat 7 for a while was that it was just fun to play. But that's too broad of an explanation. It's the equivalent of saying I really liked this, and I was only able to begin to comprehend what makes this game stick when two things occurred to me. One, when I was looking over footage of my recent trip abroad before everything went to hell, but the other one I want to begin with is the go-to topic when it comes to my personal analysis of video games: Pacing. One of the core things I think keeps a video game engaging is their pacing, maybe even more so than their mechanics. While it isn't wrong to suggest that mechanical polish is vital to a player's enjoyment, it's the pacing I feel that keeps game mechanics interesting and satisfying. Having the awareness to apply moments of calm at the right points can enhance the enjoyment of campaign missions, multiplayer modes, and even game modes. Having the next round of a horde-based mode start immediately after completion would risk diluting the impact of the tension and panic delivered to the players. But the brief moments of silence that is common with this type of gameplay not only allows the players to prepare for what's about to come, it also gives them a chance to relax. It's an effective sigh of relief. This lesson isn't just limited to horde modes. You can find it in almost every highly regarded game, such as the chaotic and fast-paced Doom revivals, to the more subtle and sinister projects like Amnesia: The Dark Descent. They're memorable because of those sections where no danger is present. Applying it to Ace Combat 7 is an extremely difficult task, given that one of the draws of the game is you being able to rain down hell from on high. You engage in destruction pornography that wouldn't look too out of place from a Michael Bay film or a post-Black Ops Call of Duty game. The story is melodramatic to the point that it has an anime-like quality to it, and each mission consists of destroying a certain target, or a number of them. And yet, I found each of the 20 missions during my run to be entertaining, despite ostensibly having the same objectives. But then I realised that pacing wasn't really applicable to missions, but it was instead applicable to its gameplay presentation and its messaging to the player. And to understand what I mean, we need to take a look at the moment-to-moment gameplay. Despite the human drama that serves as one of the cores of the campaign, the game is a power fantasy at heart. You're flying millions of dollars worth of military equipment and you're destroying billions in enemy weaponry and infrastructure. And I'm not kidding when I say billions. You annihilate ground vehicles, a variety of ships, and even sea-based platforms, with some dogfighting acting as the component to keep the game challenging. It touches the primal urge to both squash those beneath you like ants, and to be an ace pilot. Even if you're not interested in the Air Force, there's just something so captivating about the idea of being a pilot. However, the continuous bombardment of action, as I implied before, can get numbing and even boring after some time. If anything, Ace Combat 7 understands that breathing room is needed for the player to admire what they've done and truly appreciate what's just happened. It gives the brain a moment of rest after being nearly overwhelmed with destruction. This is accomplished through how the game focuses on their cutscenes and the mission preparation stages. I found it interesting how the game looks at other people that are tangentially connected to our story, focusing on the Scrap Queen, the Erusian Princess, and a scientist recording biometric information on an aging but still fierce pilot. On the surface, it can be confusing, but the calming and low-key nature of the cutscenes serves the narrative purposes of world building, and more importantly, the gameplay purposes to calm everything down. Some may be tragic, but with action being more or less isolated to the gameplay, with very few exceptions, it ends up tonally contrasting against it. It's not a bad thing, and the cutscenes end up complementing their tonal goals. Just one problem though. There's going to be people that'll dodge these cutscenes for reasons that are entirely subjective to them. Principally, they just won't be interested in this admittedly anime quality drama, either because they cannot connect to it, or just because they're more interested in gameplay rather than story. They might want to get back into the action as quickly as possible, but if they did, there is that risk of the brain digesting visual feedback like soup, rather than carefully crafted gourmet. There's two things that prevent that mindset from happening. One is the debriefs where you get vocal feedback from a superior, and the other is the briefings themselves. The former is skippable, but the latter succeeds in being both calming and a vital visual aid for when you prepare for the mission. If I can briefly divert to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 for a moment, one of the things that stuck out to me in the game was the continuous sense of panic and desperation in the mission briefings, which, in the context of the events taking place, with Russia invading all of Europe on the same day in addition to a deadly chemical attack, makes a lot of sense. Why wouldn't you be desperate and in a state of panic when the world is on fire? But it doesn't give the player a moment to relax, and the fast-paced presentation and desire to fit everything in a 1-minute time frame per mission risks the player feeling fatigued. Speaking personally, I got headaches from this game simply because it didn't want to calm down. In comparison, I found Ace Combat's approach to mission briefings quite simplistic in a welcoming way. It was refreshing in a way that made sense. Yes, the world is on fire, but our method of travel is by air, and rarely do ground units take part in our operations. There's a sense that time is on our side, thanks to both the mission briefing and the ability to choose our weapons before we take off. Because we're not overwhelmed with audiovisual noise, it allows us to digest key information quite easily. The mission briefings are briefings. They're not cutscenes to bridge one mission into the next. They show your objectives very clearly, but the potential for interruption during gameplay allows the missions to make some welcoming and challenging twists, which contributes to their engaging structure while keeping the player challenged. By the end of Ace Combat 7, careful tonal pacing allowed me to remember moments and missions. It paces itself carefully to maximize the audiovisual resources to create something memorable, and it is helped by the story that is told within gameplay, through motifs and repetition. The game has two different stories, its predetermined narrative as illustrated by cutscenes and scripted sequences, and the player's experiential journey that may differ from the main narrative. The story is about warfare while following the perspectives of other individuals that have a direct connection with the main events. But the gameplay exposition is about the player overcoming challenges while taking on two persistent and highly dangerous enemies. The first of these come in the form of the Arsenal Bird, a great giant weapon whose mere presence inflicts dread on even the most steadfast of souls. It's guided by mere programming and code, and thus will not hesitate to fire everything it has on you. It's more or less a drone carrier, but given the amount of drones it can carry, it's effectively the Grim Reaper. To come across it is effectively death, as illustrated by its introductory soundtrack, which is foreboding, looming, and alien-like in its quality, with the low angle in the cutscene establishing dominance immediately. You want to attack it? Well, it's already prepared for that in the form of shields. In the span of a single mission, Ace Combat 7 gives the player a long-term goal: destroy the Arsenal Bird, while also teasing the possibility that you can shoot it down. Contributing to this long-term goal is another that gives the player the feeling that there is a skill cap they need to succeed, and that goal comes in the form of Mihai Shalagi, known to your squad as Mr. X. This pilot is fast, deadly, and unafraid to put his aircraft and body through extreme circumstances. He's the elite of the elite who relishes dogfights, not out of some sadistic thrill, but through a desire to find an opponent who can match him. There's a memorable quote that describes him perfectly.
There are pilots like you in every generation, and I've found every last one of them.
While the Arsenal Bird is arguably a bigger threat, the rivalry you have with Mihai is arguably more important to the player, as it symbolises the apex of being a pilot. Drones will continue to be upgraded, but being the best human pilot, and having evidence of that, fuels the eventual showdown with the Great Carrier. Your desire to shoot him down is intensified when, during your encounters with him, he manages to escape by the skin of his teeth. Both the Arsenal Bird and Mihai Shalaji have very few appearances, and while each one drives the player to succeed in defeating them, it's not enough to span 20 missions. There are other gameplay-focused aims that the player has which drive the game forward and build up towards the two aforementioned main goals. The most notable one being your time in Spare Squadron. In the game, you're convicted of killing a high-value target and are sent to a strange prison where the prisoners are given multi-million-dollar jets and are sent on suicide missions. It's also at this point that you come under the command of McKinsey, and this guy berates you at every chance he gets, before ordering you to be taken away into solitary. He sends people to solitary so many times at various points during your time in Spare Squadron that it's become a bit of a meme in the Ace Combat community. The combination of smaller aims, such as you trying to get out of Spare Squadron through sheer merit, and larger ones such as the looming presence of the Arsenal Bird, keep the gameplay and mission structure interesting and engaging, because you're actively working towards something. When it's reincorporated, it only serves to amplify the player's satisfaction when they finally complete said objectives. When an Arsenal Bird gets shot down in the Stonehenge chapter, it's a turning point. You know these things are beatable, and while you did assist in its destruction, you didn't deliver the killing blow, and thus your personal objective wasn't yet achieved. You know these things are beatable, but how will you destroy the second one? That thought looms up to the moment the shields in the second bird disapparate in the most iconic part of the game. While I know I'm summarising gameplay elements, I do feel that analysing their specific inclusion and execution in terms of mechanics highlights why the game feels gripping and engaging. The story, personally, lost a bit of focus after the botched attempt to destroy the enemy satellites ended up being a cascade that cripples your electronics. The angle of being part of a penal unit was quite interesting, even if the logistics behind giving criminals aircraft with weapons is utter nonsense. But after that knockout, the narrative, most notably the Scrap Queens, lost my attention. The scientist's narrative strand held firm due to it directly informing the difficulty and gameplay, but regardless of the entire narrative's execution, it didn't matter. I still had my experiential goals I was working towards, and I came so tantalizingly close to achieving one, which in turn encouraged me to keep going. There's also something else to Ace Combat 7 that isn't easily identifiable, and that is that the complete construction of the game gives it a strange yet satisfying feel of transcendence that's rare to find within the video game industry recently. I think it's truly hit me when I was watching the introductory cutscene and gave the soundtrack a listen. More specifically, the track Skies Unknown, which plays at the start screen. The latter is an ambient piece where the roar of jet engines cut through calming tones, whilst not being intruding. There's a strange, welcoming aura to it, as if it's embracing you with open arms and preparing to take you on a journey of self-discovery. Fitting for it to be the start screen music, but the opening cutscene really drove home the core message that flying in a jet delivers, even if unintentionally. I went to India a few months ago. The flight from Heathrow to what is commonly known as Bangalore was about 9 hours there and 11 hours back. It's a long flight, and if you are unlucky, you feel like a tinned sardine throughout it, but watching the plane take off and land is still cool to watch, even in your late 20s. And rewatching some of the videos I captured on that flight reminded me that flying is not only a great sensation to feel, it's also beautiful. Flying is beautiful, and Ace Combat 7 seems to realise this, because there's this wonderful grace to its approach to the simple joy of flying. The first cutscene nails this pretty well. Instead of setting up the war or the major players or the lighthouse that's central to the conflict, it idolises the sky and portrays flying as an obtainable jewel. And the game itself knows how to maintain its beauty from mission to mission. It treats the skies with respect and reverence, and the set pieces from big to small are designed with such precision that so many core moments in the game become memorable. It knows when to tone down or turn in a different direction, and it maintains its respect for the player by knowing that destruction isn't just the appeal of the game. That's what a lot of action games get wrong, and the result is that they are forgettable experiences. I've come to measure my enjoyment for a game based on little details, whether it be intentional or not, because I find them to be a suitable measurement of how memorable a game can be. Ace Combat 7 has a lot of these, and it's nice to see that the developers approach each level as if there was a problem to solve. How do you emphasise the scale and grandeur of the Arsenal bird? Low-level cameras and a flock of birds to scale. How do you depict Soul Squadron as a unit and not merely NPCs following Mihai? Or like the cannon fodder we shot down seconds prior? Have them do a sunburst formation when you encounter them. Your second battle with them has music that begins like a gunslinger duel. There's a different briefing screen intro and music depending on what unit you are part of. There's an Italian bistro somewhere, which is weird because Italy doesn't exist in this world. And there's a still image of a dog in a cutscene posing as the princess's companion, and that alone really sums up what Ace Combat has out of everything. Shortly after the photograph of the Golden Retriever was taken, it passed away. I don't know if they added the image in before or as a result of their passing, and I'm not going to claim to know if they did, but that detail tells me what the game has. Heart. The people who made this game clearly loved and cared for this project, and it can be seen with the little brushstrokes they made. The game feels like a passion project, and it feels like a complete experience. There's a lot of love in this game, and even if you have little interest in combat flight games, I'd say give this game a go. I was in the same camp, and I played the game and I came out of it feeling happy. Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown is a finely constructed, utterly entertaining, joyful to play, and great to listen to, and on top of it, it is pure elegance. It's wrapped with graceful details that come from a team who poured their heart into its development, and with it being one of, if not the biggest surprise of last year, I wouldn't have it any other way.